Linux Luddites, episode 51, for the 30th of August, 2015. Hello and welcome to Linux Luddites, the show where we try all the latest free and open source software and then decide that we like the old stuff better. I'm Joe.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Paddy. Later in the show, we'll be looking at 3 popular image viewing and editing tools, which Joe and I will be attempting to use to complete a homework assignment set us by Jesse. Before we get into the show proper, what have you two been up to since last time?
Well, upon your recommendation, Paddy, I had a quick look at Visor, this application that allows you to hardwire your Android phone into your Linux PC, and then you can control the phone from the PC. So rather than what the KDE Connect does, which allows you to control like your mouse and keyboard and things from your phone, this is the exact opposite. And did you give this a whirl, you two?
Yeah, maybe recommendations pushing it a little too far. I did try it and it didn't work for me, so I just fobbed it off on YouTube to have a look at.
Yeah, I tried it. It's just a Chrome extension that you install and then make sure you've got ADB and stuff installed and I think USB debugging, plug your phone in and then it appears on your screen. Whatever is on your phone screen is now on your laptop screen. And you can interact with the phone and there's only about, half a second or a second of lag. So it's really useful, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say I'd probably add a bit more than that in certain circumstances. Some things are quite good, and other things like you open an app and a good couple of seconds, it would come back. And the thing is, you could tell it was working really quickly because the phone was instantaneous. It was the feedback from the phone back to the software, which was kind of laggy. And the thing is, like, even if it was 100% slick, let's say it was like having a second phone screen on your monitor, what is the point?
I would say the point would be kind of like a Chromecast, but wired. So if there was no lag, if there was zero latency, you could potentially play media from it on a bigger screen. You could plug it into a proper PC with a big monitor or a laptop that's plugged into a telly, say. And so it'd be a way to get around that Chromecasting thing, which if you've ever tried to cast your screen or do local casting, it's always a little bit ropey over the network, I find. So that's one potential use. Or if you wanted to, I don't know, plug your tablet in or your phone in to, say, a projector. Say you had a nice little projector. You could show people what you were doing with your phone. You could display an app at a conference or something. So I think there are potential uses for it. And it does say that it's beta at the moment. So hopefully they'll refine it and get that latency down. And eventually it'll get to a point where it's really useful, I reckon.
You've both said that it's wired. I mean, just for clarity for the listener, this is actually just plugging into a USB port.
Yeah, just literally plug it in to the phone and the USB port of the computer, yeah.
Yeah, and I shouldn't really be on it too much. You're right, it is beta. You do get to install it fairly quickly and I say, get ADB debugging working. And for me, it was fine. It worked both for the Moto X and for my Nexus 7. And the Moto X doesn't cast. It, despite being stock Android, it's not, a Nexus phone. And I know that you can cast Samsungs and things for people right into us, but it just won't. You just can't cast it. It's really annoying. But I also couldn't see how you could make this full screen, so I don't think it's a solution for that either. So I think it's a nice little technology demo sort of thing. However, I would say if anyone is going to look at this sort of technology demo, I'd go for what I described in the intro as the flip of this, the KDE Connect, which I was trialing Chaos the other day because we discussed it and I got a new laptop, so I thought I'd install and have a little play. And it has a little pop-up for, do you want to do KDE Connect? And I said, yeah, why not? Let's look at this. It was brilliant. I was blown away. It's wireless. It connects over the same Wi-Fi. Yes, I want to go for Wi-Fi, not Bluetooth. And you then can control the mouse absolutely seamlessly with the full phone screen. Click, double click, those sorts of things. And when you come to typing in things, then you can pop up the keyboard on your phone as well. So you can literally sit on your chair, sit back and control if you've got a it connected up to like a monitor or something, or a TV, you could just control your computer from a chair. It was like I say, absolutely seamless, and the way the keyboard was integrated and everything, I thought was really, really nice.
Is this in Plasma 5 then?
Yeah, that runs on top of Chaos. They're at Plasma 5.
Sounds as if part of the KDE stack at least works. Some of it doesn't. We'll be coming back to that later in the show.
Yeah, but the visor thing, you said that it's not full screen. Well, if your phone is 1080p and your 15-inch laptop is 720p, then it's more than full screen, and you can't see much of what's happening beyond the 720p.
So it is fixed to the resolution then?
Yeah, although when you maximize the window, it kind of stretches it. So I think in theory, it wouldn't be that hard to get it full screen. And if you turn your phone landscape, then it pops landscape as well. So
yeah, I thought that was pretty good. I did that with the tablet.
Yeah, there's a way to go with it, but it's not quite there yet. I think it's not really fair to compare it to KDE Connect because it's doing different things, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. One is controlling your phone from the interface of your PC as normal, whereas the other one is controlling the PC. I mean, all the KDE Connect, in fairness, is doing is taking over mouse control and being able to input keyboard. So it's basically sort of a Wi-Fi based USB dongle almost. So I agree that they're doing very different things, and being able to mirror the screen of your phone or tablet on the monitor is something I've never seen before. So it was quite interesting, and I also found interesting the fact that whatever you did on the screen with your mouse as you were clicking through, when I say the screen, I mean the little representation of your phone, it was instantaneous on the phone, and it was only, as I say, the feedback of whatever the swipe or the application you've loaded that was taking a bit longer.
Yeah, I definitely want to check out. But hang on a second, I can't be the only person sitting here thinking there was a promise made at the end of last time's show that I was going to ask you about something, Jesse. So presumably this Chaos is a dual boot with Sempless still then, is it?
So I went on holiday over the last couple of weeks, and I went on some trains around Europe, and I bought a new laptop and I installed Sempless on it, and I loved Sempless, and we discussed that in the review, and I thought I'd stick with it. The problem is that you are pushed to use a lot of applications when you go on holiday because you need things for storing your photos and downloading and connecting to home, and I just seem to play a lot with it. And also some of the things that we're doing for this show I did whilst on holiday, so I needed to install various applications and things, and it just fell apart. It just wasn't working for me. So I realised there may well be this problem, and with me I carried a trusty Mint 17.2 USB stick ready to go, and on about, well, not gonna lie, day one it was reinstalled.
Oh, it's almost as if I predicted it.
Yeah, it wasn't the finest hour.
Well, on that victorious bombshell, I think we should move on and do the news. First up then, the Linux Foundation, in the form of the Core Infrastructure Initiative, is proposing an open source best practices badge. This is definitely a good idea, isn't it? Let's have some more badges on things that are good.
A little bit like the Scouts, isn't it? This is actually a proposal authored by Dan Cohn, I think the guy's name is, who's a Core Infrastructure Initiative senior advisor, and David A. Wheeler, who does know what he's talking about, actually. And we mentioned him on the show in the past when talking about divertible compiling and also shell shock.
Yeah, so this is basically where they will sort of audit your code and audit the way in which you produce it, and sort of more of a holistic view to make sure that the methods by which you're making your code, writing your code, and publishing it is done with the current best practices. I think it's unfair to say securely, because we all know that subsequently down the line things may not be so secure, but at least the current best practices to show and prove who is putting in the correct kind of methods and governance behind their code to make sure that it's coming out to the best of their abilities, I suppose.
Well, the first thing that jumped out about this would make Paddy pretty happy. All the websites have to be HTTPS, not HTTP, to get the badge.
Yes, and the other thing that makes me very happy is this is the Linux Foundation again, spreading their grasp even further.
The thing that I don't get about this, well, I have multiple questions actually in my notes. The first one is, how do you retest it? I mean, is this something that once it's been done, you are gold stamped forever, or do they have to prove it every year, prove it every week, prove it every time they release code? These things need to be kept up to make sure that standards don't slip.
Presumably, you'd get it, and then it would be a constant appraisal of whether you're keeping up with it. And a bit like a Michelin star for a restaurant, you can lose it at any time. And so that's what I envisaged with this, that it'd be kind of, you'd get this badge of honor and then you'd get it taken away in disgrace if you didn't keep up with all their requirements.
Okay, my second question, which having read through it, is that some of the requirements for you to actually get this badge are in the event of an attack or a vulnerability, and your response to those. How do you test for someone's response to something that hasn't happened in order to give them an accreditation? That just doesn't make any sense.
Well, again, it's probably you lose it if you don't respond well.
Oh, that makes more sense. Yeah, I'll give you that.
So to get this badge and keep it, you've got to respond to bug reports properly, got to have an automated build system. And some of it sounds quite sensible, but I think it's a bit draconian, the HTTPS business. And I think there's a danger that you're going to have this two-tier system. And we talked about that before with the core infrastructure initiative, that you'll have certain blessed projects and then other ones that aren't blessed. And so they'll just kind of pull apart from each other. And you'll get the ones that are getting some nice money and the badge, and then other ones that don't get it. So that worries me a little bit.
Yeah, and similarly, the next story worries me a little bit.
Yes, this is the Software Freedom Conservancy's announcement of the Debian copyright aggregation project, and basically allows Debian contributors two options to ensure defense of their software freedom. So they can choose to either assign the code or the program or the contributions that they've made either sort of to the Software Conservancy for permanent stewardship, or they can sign the Conservancy's license enforcement agreement, which then allows the Conservancy authority to enforce their free software licenses, the GPLs.
So presumably Conservancy are running out of lawsuits to pursue and they want some more kind of fodder for that then, so they can make a few quid.
Is that the concern you're sharing, Paddy?
Something along those lines, yes. I mean, I have a slightly dubious opinion of Conservancy. I can see why you need someone in to enforce the GPL. If it exists, there's no point not enforcing it because it may as well just not exist. But equally, I've not been a huge fan of some of the actions they've taken in the past, and some of the personalities involved rub the wrong way totally.
Well, I can see where you're coming from, Paddy, that they do need to defend the GPL. But the whole thing, the whole idea of Conservancy just feels litigious. I mean, that is by its very nature what it is. And I think that we live in a overly litigious society as it is. And I don't know, that's just one of the many, many things I don't like about America. No, I'm only joking. No, but that is one of the things about America that has spread to this country and presumably the rest of Europe. Just the fact that that's everyone's first response to everything, sue, rather than just trying to sort it out another way. But they would probably argue that it's the last resort and they write letters and try and ask people nicely to conform and respect the GPL. And it's only ever the last resort to go to court. But I don't know, something about the whole thing doesn't sit very well with me, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and regular listeners will know that something that doesn't sit very well with me is overly complex software. And let's talk about Bcache FS. This is a product from Kent Overstreet, and it's based on Bcache, which is the Linux kernel block layer cache. And they were developing this and suddenly realized they had the makings of a file system there. And obviously Bcache itself was for pairing a large capacity hard drive with a low capacity high performance solid state drive to act as a cache system. So it's looking very much as if that's what's going to be needed to actually run the file system. Kent says it's more or less feature complete, nothing critical should be missing, and you can try it out and play with it now. And he's asking for more testers and users to do so. But he also says the on-disk format is not finalized yet and won't be for a while, though changes are infrequent at this point, which kind of suggests that fine, you can use it, but with a large dose of caution.
Yeah, make sure you've got backups of anything that's on the file system, by the sounds of things. And so it's going to have ZFS or BTreeFS style features, but supposedly the performance of ext4, or that's at least the aim for it, which sounds like a good idea to me eventually. And it needs people to get in there and test it and actually develop it and risk their data or put data that they don't mind risking on there. But this is not going to happen anytime soon, is it? I'm not going to trust this anytime soon. I mean, even BtrFS, ButterFS, as some people say, there's no way I trust that. And that's been around for years and years and years now.
Yeah, on the ButterFS, as I do say, type argument, I do wonder whether or not it's been kind of clouded by various opinions and discussions, because people generally have a view that it's not ready, and arguably it's not in a lot of big deployments. There is Facebook, I think, is the classic example of where it is. But it's been developed for a couple of years or a number of years, and it's still not ready. There's no point in jumping on this one and saying, oh, it's not quite ready yet. It's going to need years and years. And you're absolutely right. You're not going to start changing your file system to something which has been around for 6 months or even a year. It needs to be well and truly embedded and tested and flogged to make sure that it's ready for the mainstream. You're not going to see this in any installer in the next year or so, are you?
I thought it was going to be standard with Fedora 23. No, in all seriousness, we've not actually said what's good about this or what the benefits are. And I guess a big thing, and the competitor with the other systems we actually mentioned, is the copy on write. But as Joe said earlier, it's supposed to have the same sort of performance as file systems that don't boast those sort of facilities.
Yeah, definitely one to watch for the future. But for now, I think it's a bit of a curiosity and something to be tested rather than put into production. But moving on then, Go 1.5 has been released and now it's self-hosting. And the compiler and runtime are now written entirely in Go with a bit of assembler. So C is no longer involved. So the C compiler isn't necessary anymore. Now, unfortunately, I don't know what any of that means. So Paddy, you're going to have to fill me in.
I think it's fairly self-evident what it means, actually. Basically built a bootstrap Go environment in Go now. Whereas in the past, you needed a C compiler to create the runtime and some of the aspects of the environment. So I guess from Go's point of view, the Google guy's point of view, this is a good thing and it will help them port faster because they're obviously very happy with Go. I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested to hear some of the listeners' feedback, to be honest, because I tried writing some code in Go and spent a while reading the language spec and working out how to actually use it. And whilst some of it's really attractive to me, there are aspects that I find really odd. I mean, particularly the array handling, the confusion between arrays, maps and slices and all the rest of it. And I don't see why that's not a lot simpler in the language, but maybe that's just me.
Well, it sounds like it's getting more and more mature, and this 1.5 release seems to be quite a milestone then, if you no longer need a C compiler, if you can actually do it all in itself.
That's right, yeah. I mean, there is a bit of C kicking around still to actually allow you to link to C programs as well. But other than that, it is all self-hosted now, as you say.
Yeah, and eventually the Go programs can now run with Go Max Prox, which is set to the number of cores available. Because prior releases, it was set to 1, and I found that a real problem.
Oh, man, let's move on before me and Jesse make even more of a fool of ourselves.
And we haven't mentioned phones, and it's not coming yet. We're going to talk about another favourite topic, the Internet of Things. And this is Contiki 3, which has been released. Contiki 2.7 was previously released in November 2013, so it's been quite a while. And this is under a 3-clause BSD license, so it's open software, and it's sort of brings together a lot of the necessary operating system parts for Internet of Things devices. It's very low memory, runs very low power, and I'm gonna just push through to the point that I need to make, which is that there are various bits of hardware that have been released at a similar time to this. One of them is SensorTag from Texas Instruments, which has Wi-Fi and a bunch of sensors and also Bluetooth. Now, you can use the Contiki mesh, which is a part of the Contiki operating system, and the Bluetooth with a piece of software called ThinkSquare. And what ThinkSquare then allows you to do is to pair with that device using your Bluetooth with an Android phone or other phone, and then you can control it. I've ploughed through this in order to get to the point of ThinkSquare, because ThinkSquare is what Tado runs. And Tado is the only Internet of Things thing that I have, and I've now wrapped it up into the news.
So it sounds like we're talking about a potential standardization of Internet of Things devices that could potentially all run this Kontiki operating system, which I suppose is a good thing. I don't know. Is it a good thing or a bad thing from a security point of view? I suppose it means there's one thing that you can harden and secure, but then there's also one thing that you can focus your efforts to attack.
Well, I think you've just described both sides of the fence, and people generally fall on one or the other, don't they? But it does sound like it's it has a whole load of updates and improvements. And if you're into Internet of Things or are looking at developing something, this hardware that I mentioned from Texas Instruments is pretty cheap, and it's got a whole bunch of sensors and things in it, and Kontiki runs on that. So I think, in my opinion, it would be best if you actually diversify, not all use one operating system, but all communicate on one protocol, because otherwise this Internet of Things revolution is going to be a right hodgepodge of requiring all sorts of different bits of software and patches to make them all work together, which is exactly the opposite of actually what it's trying to do, or what everyone wants it to do.
Standardized APIs, in other words.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great for consumers, awful for manufacturers who are trying to sell kit. Sticking on the topic of small devices, I was caught by an article I saw recently that was talking about market share of Chinese chip makers. Now, it's not really a news piece, but I wanted to put it in because I just thought it was quite interesting. And the article was saying the combined market share for tablet computer processors in 2010, made by Rockchip and Allwinner, was just 0.3%, but by 2013 it had reached more than 27%. And also that 80% or more than 80% of the world's smartphones were actually made in China in 2013. And there was a quote that jumped out at me as well, and that was, Intel was so concerned with the gains being made by the Chinese newcomers in tablets and the lack of its own progress there, that it paid out subsidies that forced its mobile unit to report a loss of $4 billion in an effort to get into the market.
So it's further evidence of Intel being very scared by the rise of ARM processors then.
I think it is, and it's also an indication, indirectly somewhat, of the general move of manufacturing and those sort of industries over to that part of the world. Although I've also seen pieces indicating that manufacturing is moving out of China now, as other parts of the world are actually becoming cheaper.
It's funny, I was thinking about this, that am I right in thinking almost all of the manufacturing is around Shenzhen in China? There's one area where it's all happening, and it reminds me of kind of the Industrial Revolution in this country, where it was all kind of up north, and we had all the coal mines and stuff and the steel works, and then when our economy moved away from that stuff, you just had these really desperate places. And I know you live up north, kind of, Paddy, although you like to deny it. But I mean, you go through some of those formerly booming industrial towns, and it's a bit grim and a bit desolate. And I just can't help but think that, yeah, as it gets cheaper to move things away to other countries, China might have this same effect. And you might have these areas of China that just end up being kind of ghost towns and shadows of their former selves.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Whether it'll play out quite the same as it did over here, I'm not convinced, because obviously they've got a far more directed economy as opposed to the vaguely free market economy we had in the 19th century and lost in the 20th century in the UK. Yeah, no, it's certainly a good point. Well, staying with Rockchip, they also seem to be doing something that I think Joe will probably approve of.
Well, kind of, in that they're making a version of Android called Lightwork OS that actually has a start menu and windowed applications and looks like a proper operating system. But then again, it looks exactly like Windows 7, so that is a bit disturbing. But at the same time, you can go in and switch it off, apparently. There's an option to toggle that on and off. And we've gone on and on and on this show about how these ARM-based touch devices are real computers. And this is yet another example of that you can actually go and buy a tablet that has got a proper interface, or, a proper computer interface, and hooked it up to the relevant peripherals, probably a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse or keyboard touchpad combo. You could use this thing as a proper computer, because that's what it is. It is a computer, and it's just the software that makes us think that tablets aren't computers.
Yeah, I think the Windows sort of push they've made is a bit extreme, when they've put a mock Windows logo on the wallpaper in the image. But I have to admit, if you could switch as easily as maybe they're claiming between having a handheld device which is standard Android for finger type control, and then put it in some sort of dock or rest it against the wall and have a keyboard and mouse and switch it to a sort of standard WIMP desktop, I think that'd be quite a useful item to rather than having one or the other, have the same device be able to be switched between the two is quite an appealing thought. However, I do worry how well Android applications will look and run when windowed. I mean, the only examples I know of are things like Keep, which on my PC, if I load it up, it looks the same as my phone does, but in a little window. And that's okay because you don't need to really sort of resize it. You don't need to put it full screen and things like this. Whereas other applications which haven't been written to be in Windows or resize and things might have a right old funny time with it. I kind of feel it's going to be like running KDE apps on a GTK3 sort of desktop or what have you, and you get that sort of that jarring interface.
Yeah, but this interface is here now and is only going to continue with other people doing similar things like Andromium and Remix OS. So as there are more and more devices capable of doing this, then presumably there are going to be more and more applications written to be able to be windowed. As it was, there was no point making an application that would look good resized and being able to be dragged around the screen. Whereas now we're seeing these interfaces, we're actually seeing a point in writing them.
Do you think it's telling that it is an interface that stays the same as well? It isn't a convergence interface, if you like, that's forever swapping between one state and another.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, though, is it? Because there is a toggle switch. And as Jesse said, I could picture myself using that toggle switch, maybe even having a widget on the desktop to switch it. And it might not be automatic convergence, but it seems to be capable of being a convergent device in that you can just carry it on a train and flick around with your thumbs, as Jesse said, or you can take it to the office, put it on your desk and start using it properly. So I don't think it's fair to say that it isn't convergent, really.
One of the big issues with these sort of devices, though, has always been the question of input. And there's been a couple of interesting developments on that front, which I think we're going to come back to next show. But in the meantime, should we move on but still talk about phones?
That's right, we've been tippy-toeing around them with tablets, but now let's get fully into phones. And this is the fact that Google have relaxed slightly the requirements they have to allow manufacturers and resellers of phones with Android on to be part of the Google Play Store and the installed Google apps. So normally, if you want to have Android on your phone, Google have to approve it with a number of caveats for you then to be able to load the Google Play Store on and use all the Google services. And many of those caveats were the applications that had to come with it. So, for example, Gmail and Google Earth and Google Docs and things like this. Now, Google Earth has been dropped previously as a requirement, so has Keep. But more recently, and this is the news, they've actually dropped Google Play Games, Books, and interestingly enough, Google Plus. Whether or not this means the death knell for Google Plus, I don't know. But it does mean that you have to keep all the other ones still. There is a huge host of them. And my problem is that it's not the Google applications that get in the way. I mean, maybe I'm a little bit too signed up to Google because they're most of the applications that I use for a lot of the basic functions of phones. But my issue is when Samsung adds their own suite of applications, and then Orange or Vodafone, whoever the carrier is, adds their own suite of applications, and you end up with just a whole load of terrible ones when the Google ones are the ones you can normally remove, whereas the Samsung and carrier ones, or HTC, whoever, are the ones which stick there and just get in the way and annoy me.
Well, I'm sitting here looking at my app drawer thinking, I've got a rooted phone. Why haven't I got rid of Play Books, Play Games, Play Movies and TV, and Play Newsstand, apps that I've never once opened because I've no interest in? So maybe I ought to get around to that. But you're right, Jesse. The fewer apps that comes on the phone in the first place, the happier I will be, quite frankly. There's nothing more satisfying than flashing a custom ROM and you go to the app drawer and it's all on one page because there are so few things installed. And you have complete control over what you're gonna put Chrome on it. You're gonna put Play Music. You're gonna put YouTube if that's what you want. But yeah, it's good news to me. Although fewer Google apps means probably more Samsung or LG, other bloatware that you just don't want. So it's a bit of a mixed bag of news, this, I think.
Do you think they're potentially doing this because they're trying to get down to a reasonable size to fit on these lower powered devices they're looking to take over the Indias and Chinas of the world with?
That makes sense, I suppose. Although generally speaking, storage isn't really a huge issue. I mean, they're generally going to be 16 gig minimum. And if you buy a Nexus 5, the cheapest one was a 16 gig. So I don't think that makes sense really, because even these fairly low-end devices that they're looking at are capable of running those apps. And yeah, they might not have a huge amount of storage left to install new apps, but I don't think you're going to start seeing like 4 gig phones, or I mean, even 8 gig is a bit old hat now. So no, I'm not convinced by that really.
Well, perhaps I was just speaking from sort of personal experience, sort of looking sideways at my desk and looking at my old phone here, which definitely doesn't have room to have all these applications on it.
There's bound to be some stuff you can delete. Presumably it's rooted, so you could get rid of some of the useless applications.
Yeah, I have. That's the point. I've got it down to the bare minimum. It's I occasionally have to put stuff on and then take it off again to put something else on. It's a highly annoying state of affairs. I guess I should just spend a little bit of money and get a new phone.
Yeah, maybe.
Some research from a German company called GfK into mobile sales, and they were talking about mobile sales to actual users as opposed to suppliers. And they said it was a troubling quarter for companies offering devices in the mid-range of the market at prices between $250 and $500. In the two biggest smartphone markets, North America and China, which also account for the lion's share of worldwide revenue, consumers were most interested in higher-end smartphones that cost $500 or more. In the US, low-end handsets that cost up to $250 also proved popular among consumers. And really what they're flagging up here is a bit of a polarization and a squeezed middle, much as we're seeing within the whole economy in a lot of the developed nations at the moment. The middle's disappearing, people at the top are fine, the people at the bottom are expanding, and that's being reflected in the mobile phone purchasing.
I think it's because if you want to have a flagship device, that classic phrase, you're going to go for the absolute top end. But it's also not just the hardware side; it's the look at me, aren't I flash? Look what I've got kind of side. It's a statement, it's a fashion item. So there's no point in trying to save a few £100 if you're trying to do this brand new iPhone or brand new Samsung Edge and all these sorts of things. You're going to be spending the big money. If that's not your view, why would you spend £400 on a phone? Of course you don't. You spend like 150 and not bother with all of the bells and whistles that the £500, £700 phones are giving you, but you're still getting nowadays. I mean, we keep on talking about how good low-end phones are. You're still getting a perfectly good, usable piece of hardware. Whereas back in the day, if you bought a low-end phone, you knew it was a low-end phone.
Yeah, I do. Go on then, let's move it on, because we do spend too much time talking about phones apparently on the show. Low-end phones then. Seems to be like a plethora of them.
Yeah, and two that have been unveiled by Apple's former CEO, John Sculley, look quite nice to me. And they're the Obi World phones. And there's one very low end that's only 3G, and one slightly higher end model that's got 4G and more features and looks much more attractive to me. But the prices of them are very low for those kind of specs to me. You're talking about $130 or $200. And the $200 one, I mean, am I just wildly out of touch? Or 4G, 5-inch 1080p display, Android Lollipop, 32 gigs of storage, 3 gigs of RAM, and an octa-core CPU for $200. I mean, that seems pretty cheap to me.
Jolly well does, doesn't it? I was just about to pull you up on a quad core, but you're right, it's octa-core and 3 gig. And if we just wrap this up with another announcement, which is the ZUK Z1, which is the Lenovo-backed Chinese company who are releasing the only CyanogenPowered mobile phone now that OnePlus have fallen out with CyanogenMod. And that is in the $300 sort of price bracket, and I've got the specs here, but there's no point in saying them because they're basically exactly the same. Yeah, 3G, octa-core, 5.5-inch screen, yada, yada, yada. And so that's $100 more coming out of China, and the one that you're talking about is designed in San Francisco, but I presume also made in China.
Well, everything is, as we said earlier.
Did you just say that it's the only cyanogen-powered phone around at the moment, Jesse?
To my knowledge, although I'm willing to be proved wrong.
Okay, here we go. A UK company called Wiley Fox has just appeared, no one's ever heard of previously. They're claiming they want to become an edgy brand, which sounds a bit dubious, but the actual hardware looks okay, to be honest. They're punting out 2 cheap phones running Cyanogen. There's the 5-inch Swift, which is priced at £129, which is about $200 in funny money, and the 5.5-inch Storm, which will set you back £199 or just over $300. The Swift is an entry-level device with a Snapdragon 410, 2 gig of RAM, 18 gigs of internal storage, and 13 and 5 megapixel cameras. And the Storm is more of a solid mid-range phone and uses a Snapdragon 615, has 3 gig of RAM, comes with 32 gig of storage, expandable up to 128, and 20 and 8 megapixel cameras. Now, both of these come with Cyanogen 12.1, which I think is Android 5.1 Lollipop, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
In Jesse's defense, they're available to pre-order, so you can't actually get one at the moment.
Yeah, but it's gone for the same sales model as the ZUK or ZUK and the OnePlus One previously, haven't they? It's direct from the manufacturer via the web.
Yeah, which is a bit of a risk as a consumer because you don't actually know what you're getting. You can't go to a shop, hold it in your hands. You're relying on reviews and YouTube videos and stuff.
That's true, but it worked out well for the Motorola X. Don't forget that.
Yeah, and it worked out well for my OnePlus One, although I had actually held someone's in my hand, so I did know what I was getting for that.
Yeah, I think the overall picture is, well, twofold really. That there are increasingly good phones for what seem to be quite sensible amounts of money out there, and there are increasingly good phones running Cyanogen as opposed to straight Android.
Yeah, but I have a friend who is fairly tech savvy, and I said, why don't you look at getting a OnePlus or Huawei or one of these other sort of, I don't want to say up and coming because they've proved themselves. There's the OnePlus 2 now, they're getting the next generations out. Why don't you look at one of those? And he hadn't really heard of them. He didn't really, like Joe said, trust the model of just buying it straight from a website without ever seeing it and these sorts of things. So I think that while we know, and I'm sure our audience knows about these sorts of things that are going on, it's very difficult for them to make a huge impact into the market in maybe sort of Western society. It may well be different in India and China where it's a standard method or it's the first smartphone or, or you're upgrading to one of these, whatever it might be. But I don't think that the sort of Joe public has the same consciousness of these devices that we do.
So do you think the lack of bricks and mortar purchasing ability is going to hurt these then?
Bricks and mortar and advertising. I've seen loads of iPhone adverts. I've seen loads of Samsung adverts, and I've never seen an advert for basically anything else. I mean, HTC used to do a lot, but now they've sort of toned it down a bit. So it's not only you can't go into a Vodafone or a 3 shop and buy one or put your hands on it at least. And also you won't know about them because you won't have seen them on billboards or adverts on TV. So how would, I don't want to say it, but someone's mum know about these as an option unless they're actually told about them?
Well, that's why they're cheap, though. That's why the OnePlus One, at the time when it came out, was a beast of a phone that could rival the flagships from Samsung, but was half the price or even less than that. And it's because their marketing budget is zero. It's all social networking, shows like this, YouTube channels, people reviewing stuff, and word of mouth rather than the traditional advertising model. And so, yeah, they're not going to sell as many, but there's smaller companies who don't have that huge marketing budget, but they don't really need that because the internet's here and word of mouth is here.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, bigger tech sites than us, dare I say, like ZDNet and things like this, will talk about them and The Verge and that. So they do get out to the wider, maybe interested tech community than just the very, very sort of core nerdiness. But on these Wiley Fox phones, I think one of the things they've done will be coming out on the new Android operating system, but they've actually beaten them to it, which is the sort of allocations that you give to applications to use cameras, your photos, contacts, things like this, and it pops up when they go to do it. And you can also say pop up every time or pop up when the requirement on that allocation has increased somehow. So it's a really good way of being able to sort of clamp down what these possibly nefarious applications get access to.
Yeah, that permissions thing is what I'm really looking forward to most in the next version of Android. But I think the fact that these phones are coming with Cyanogen as well, and they're not mainstream, I think the reality is they are for geeks or enthusiasts, whatever you want to call them. They're for people like us who actually read tech press and know what's going on. And the average person, like, this mythical mum figure who just goes into a shop or phones up their carrier and gets the upgrade, they're going to have Samsungs and possibly LG or more likely iPhones. And I think that we're talking about a niche in the market. I think that niche is quite big because there are a lot of people who are interested in this and enthusiastic about it. But I don't think that you're ever really likely to see this mythical mum figure with a Cyanogen mod phone from a small Chinese manufacturer like OnePlus or these new things we're talking about.
Yeah, I can't picture the conversation with my mum trying to explain the difference between Cyanogen mod and Android being the same but different. It will just blow her mind.
Yeah, I mean, both our mums have got Samsung phones, haven't they?
Yep.
So what does that tell you? But that's the end of the news then. Let's talk about how Jesse tortured us for a week.
So as Joe pointed out, I don't think it was quite torture, but I did set these to a few sort of challenges so that we could do a group test on some of the more simple photo editing software. Now, there is, with any group test, a huge suite within Linux. And so actually selecting 3 to look at was a bit of a task in itself. And it boiled down to, for me, 4, unfortunately: GwenView, PhotoXX, Shotwell, and FSpot. I had some issues with FSpot, so we dropped that one. So we stuck with the initial 3. Now, they were shared. Paddy had a quick look at GwenView. Joe looked at PhotoXX, and I looked at Shotwell. And I say there was a bit of homework involved. I mentioned in the intro that I was on holiday, so I took a few kind of typical photos with a flaw in each one and then got them to remedy that flaw or improve or change the photo in some way in order to test the full capabilities of the software. So they range from brightening and straightening and things like this.
I've got to point out this is something totally new to me because I don't do photography in the slightest, not even on my phone. And it was quite hard work, actually.
I don't think the software you were given made it particularly easy either.
I don't think so, no.
And I've got to point out that I am reasonably proficient with Photoshop and GIMP, but I've never used any photo management software. I've done a fair bit of photo editing, but never management. So it was kind of new to me as well, in a way.
Yeah, so these ones aren't really for full-on editing, as you've pointed out. Things like Darkroom are much better for that. Whereas if you've got, your holiday snaps and you just wanted to remove red eye or brighten or tweak them here and there, but also have them in a nice layout, maybe some sort of chronological order or by folder and things like this, then that's where these come in. And I have to admit that I've not really used any of these pieces of software. I've used them here and there, but I generally look straight into my folders for stuff and then use specific things for editing and then resave them. So I've not used a management tool, and this was maybe a slightly selfish way for me to force myself to review them and pick one out of them. So as I said, I dropped FSpot from this roundup. It's a possibility if you want to look at it, but I dropped it on an installation problem. So how did you guys do with installing the software?
Well, as you mentioned, I was lumbered with GwenView, and it's part of the KDE applications bundle. As such, the web page explaining what it does is really quite sparse, and also the online user manual is also very limited. So if it hadn't installed easily, I would have had a problem. It did, though, fortunately enough. Sudo apt get GwenView pulled down 106 files, which took up 200 megabytes of disk space.
Presumably that's mostly cute stuff to make it work with KDE, though. If you were running a KDE desktop, it would have been a lot smaller.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess if you're running a KDE desktop, it'd probably be there in the first place.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Well, similarly for me, Photox, as it's called, not PhotoXX, although that's how it's spelled, was just an apt-get install away, no problem, in Ubuntu 14.04, I think. Or did I do it in Ubuntu? I don't know. Anyway, an Ubuntu flavor. So yeah, very, very easy to install and get up and running.
Yeah, there's a difference between getting them running, though, and actually using them. I know we're going to talk about the tasks in a minute, but I mean, I needed this to be intuitive, partly because I didn't know what I was doing to achieve anything that Jesse wanted me to do, and partly because I'd never used it before. I don't think it really helps that when you click the help button for the Gwenview handbook in the actual application, you get an error message saying, could not launch the KDE Help Center, could not find service K Helper Center. I mean, how hard is it, for example, to link your documentation to be in HTML format, so you're not actually reliant on some other software running in the background if you're making the application available to be run outside of the KDE environment?
Yeah, or just literally a link to a wiki online somewhere would be better than nothing.
And just to round off the three, Shotwell is the standard photo application manager in Ubuntu, so it was there straight away. And in Joe discussing his installation, it occurred to me that I was having a nightmare with fspot because I was using Simplis, and actually I came back home and installed it on Ubuntu, and it's an apt-get away, so fear not, that's not so bad. So as photo management suites or photo management software, they need to pull in all the files. And when you load up Shotwell, it asks you straight away, where are your files? Do you want to import all of your pictures from your pictures directory, or do you want to select a particular folder? It's all in a standard Ubuntu type GUI, and you select it, and it goes through a crunching process where it imports, your hundreds, thousands, tens, whatever it may be, of photos, making thumbnails, and then they're all arranged in a nice sort of grid pattern. You can expand and contract to get them bigger and smaller, and it allows you to sort them by events and times and tags if you have them. So what was it like in importing for Gwenview?
I didn't actually try doing that as you would for importing a music library, for instance. I just tried opening the files you'd sent us to actually work on them. And that was slightly confusing because it's got two different file browsing experiences going on. There's one with a tiled look, if you like, from the main screen. But if you go to the open option on the file menu, you get a totally different look and feel, which could be confusing, I think, for a new user.
I had a quick look at Gwenview, and I was also confused by the difference that I couldn't work out how to get from one to the other.
Well, in Photox, it was all quite straightforward, really. You just select the folder that you want to import from, and depending on the number of photos, I tried it with just the photos you'd sent us, which was about 8 or 9, and that was almost instantaneous. And then I tried it with a bigger directory that was, I don't know, maybe 1,000 or so, and that took, 20, 30 seconds. But then they were all there, and it was easy to browse through them. So no complaints on that score.
An overall sort of look and feel, Joe, of the program?
Well, a bit 90s, really. A little bit amateurish. And, looks-wise and feel-wise, very confusing menus, really. Just every category had a load of options in it. And no matter what I wanted to do, I had to go through more or less all of them to find it. So it didn't seem to be logically laid out to me at all. But I mean, maybe that's because I'm more used to the GIMP way of doing things. And because it's got this extra feature of managing your photos, that maybe threw me. But no, overall, I mean, it did what it had to do. And I managed to complete all of the tasks that you set me, more or less. But it wasn't intuitive, and it would be something you would have to learn to use. Maybe that's just because it's a complex piece of software, and there is just a learning curve involved with that. And you can't expect to do all these different things intuitively and easily unless you've used the piece of software before. So maybe I'm being unfairly harsh on it, because ultimately it did get done everything I needed to get done. And if I did that, a few times, I'm sure I'd learn where everything was. So, I mean, it could do with a bit of a spruce up. I mean, it reminded me a bit of Audacity in that it's kind of very old-fashioned looking, very ugly, but actually more or less does the job that you want it to do when you need it to do it, once you've learned where everything is.
Yeah, so functionally it's fairly complete.
I would say so, yeah. I mean, it's not exactly Photoshop, but it's not trying to be that. If you really want to get into serious photo editing, then you need a standalone piece of software for that. So yeah, I would say for what it is functionally complete. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel we're probably jumping a bit ahead to the summary here at the end, but to answer your question, Jesse, from my point of view, I experienced a really inconsistent user interface. I mean, that's partly because the plugins don't all operate in a similar manner. It was hard to find options, in some cases because they're not present. Things like undo only work some of the time, depending on what you've actually just done. And I don't know. I don't think it's just down to my lack of experience with this sort of application. I mean, out of the tasks, I only managed to achieve 2 of them, I think. And they were ones I actually used plugins for. And they were plugins from Hugin, which you've spoken about before on the show. So the actual functionality built into Gwenview didn't allow me to achieve anything you asked me to.
Sounds like you got a real duff piece of software to me.
Well, it could be a duff piece of software or a duff user. And I'm hoping that Jesse's actually looked at it and seen whether I'm right or not.
When you put the photos up from your answers, let's say, I was shocked to see there the 2 way more advanced things down the latter things that I'd given you to do. No straightening, no brightening, no black and white. The more simple tasks. You managed to make a high dynamic range photo and stitch 2 photos together, which I think is, sort of the panorama type thing, which I think is far more technical than you would expect a basic photo editing software to do. And that's what I thought would tax or push these bits of software if they're only for tinkering. So I was very surprised to see that. You're absolutely right. I had a look at it, and I should have had a bit more of a look when I was selecting which pieces of software because it is awful.
Yeah, you owe me a pint or several pints, I think.
Yeah, I feel I do. Yeah, you've definitely got a duffer. And you're absolutely right. Without actually installing the plugins, you can't really edit at all, and it's a horrible interface. And so, yeah, I feel quite bad for lumping you with that one.
Did you try Photox then, Jesse?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I had a look at them all.
Do you agree with me then that it's not the most attractive interface, but it does what you need it to do once you found the menu for it?
Yeah, it's definitely stuck in the past, and it doesn't have a sort of an interface that you would think of. I mean, I'm used to Shotwell. I've used it a number of times for doing tiny little tweaks, but I think it's quite nicely laid out. There's sort of a timeline down the left, nice big pictures, and you can right click on them and edit and things like this. It's very intuitive. You're absolutely right. The Photox was a lot less intuitive, but I was really surprised at the large range of options and things that you could do. It could do far more than a basic quote unquote sort of bit of software should be able to do, in my opinion. So yeah, I was surprised. I think Shotwell sits in the middle of these 3 with the layout, the sort of modern interface, and some basic editing abilities, whereas Gwenview sounds awful, and Photox has a lot more options and abilities to tweak.
Yeah, like for example, you asked me to straighten a photo, and that was very straightforward. You asked me to turn one black and white, and it was in a strange place. It was in the repair menu, but I found the color options and managed to make it black and white. And you'd kind of said, or sepia, and it did have an option for that, but it was pretty rubbish. It just made it orange. So not very good.
Yeah, I looked at that as well, and I think it's a case of turning a photo black and white and then turning that sepia. It does it in succession rather than from the original.
Right. Okay. Well, either way, I wasn't impressed with that. But black and white is black and white, and that worked perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
And you also asked about custom cropping. Basically, you said an odd ratio of 7:4. And yeah, that's easy enough to do. You just set whatever ratio you want, and then it automatically does it. That's no problem. Brightness, that was easy as well. And one thing you asked, can it open the .cr2, which is Canon's raw photo format, uncompressed? And yeah, it had to think about it for a bit, but after a couple of seconds, it said yes and opened it, no problem.
It sounds like it had a very easy life. I mean, let's go back to this de-skewing thing, the straightening the picture of the bicycle, which Jesse asked us to do. I thought, yeah, like you, it'd be a really straightforward thing to achieve. But in Gwenview, you can only rotate things in 90-degree increments. And there is no way to actually put in anything other than that. So it'll just happily turn it round and round and round, but it won't actually straighten things for you. I thought it was down to me at that stage. So I did a bit of Googling and then realised, no, I'm going to need plugins to do an awful lot of these jobs. 23 packages, over 100 megabytes of disk later, and I didn't have any means to deskew things or turn things into black and white or any of the other tasks Jesse asked me to do.
This is getting worse and worse. I'm so sorry, Paddy.
Well, the black and white thing was good, actually, because it didn't just fail, it actually segfaulted.
Oh, nice. So what, it was trying to actually do it and then wouldn't do it?
Yeah, it was good enough to warn me that the operation couldn't be undone because it doesn't provide undo on that particular type of activity. But when you click OK, it just segfaulted and, no, null point.
Oh dear, oh dear.
The interesting thing, if we go back to just the straightening one that Shotwell does, is that when you rotate it, it auto crops as well. So it keeps the same ratio that you had at the start, but rather than sort of giving you a funny angled photo, it auto crops it to give you a square photo. And as you rotate it by 0.1 degree increments, the cropping automatically does it. Whereas in Photox, it's a sort of rotate and crop manually type affair. So they're both in the same sort of function, aren't they? You can turn the photo and then you select where you want the crop to be in that photo.
Yeah, although there is an auto crop option, it is a separate function. You have to do that afterwards, but it is there. I didn't do it because I was following orders and it didn't say anything about cropping it, but I did look into it, and yeah, you can auto crop it. But I mean, Photox seems to be the complete opposite of Gwenview in that the documentation is actually really good, because there's a YouTube video which is quite long and timestamped, thankfully, that goes through all the functions and shows you how to use everything. I tried to not use that at first and then fell down with the stitching the panorama together. But you've got a screen capture of someone pointing you through exactly how to do everything. So although it's not intuitive, the documentation is there, and in the nicest possible way, a video. What's better than that? Someone talking you through it. So I have to give it a massive thumbs up there, a massive plus point. In fact, that's how I learned that it's called Photox and not Photo XX. So presumably you didn't watch that video, Jesse.
No, I didn't watch any of the videos, so I wouldn't have picked up on that. But for both the HDR and the sort of photo splicing in that software, you say you want to do it, and then you pick the photos you want and sort of add them to a list, don't you? And then you say, off you go, make it magically happen, and it sort of churns through looking for lights and darks in the case of high dynamic range. And just so we're clear for the listener, that is the idea that you get multiple photographs with different exposures. Generally, the classic is 3, one under, one over, one perfectly exposed. And then you blend them into one, selecting the correct exposure from each one, and it gives you a much more even photo. So the photo that I used was in a park with a very shadowy area under a tree, a very bright area where there were no tree shadows, and everything in between. So it means you can get a better photo than the camera is able to capture.
Except that when I tried to do that, it suddenly gave me this option with 2 crossed lines that you could adjust, and I had no idea what it was doing. That's presumably because I have no idea what I'm doing. So maybe if you've done it before and you understand about HDR, that would be quite logical. But to me, it just seemed quite confusing. I mean, you've done it before. Am I right that it did make sense?
Yeah. So it's for adjusting various brightnesses and making the darks darker or the light patches lighter and things like this. So you're absolutely right. It's just tweaking it afterwards to get the photo that you want. But I was quite pleasantly impressed with the results straight out of the box. So it seems to know what it's doing. So of the 2 that were completed, Paddy, not user error, I also agree the other tasks were impossible. How was the HDR and the stitching?
It was actually very straightforward. You obviously had to have the plugins installed to do anything with this bit of software. And I wasn't sure, but there was a plugin called Blend Bracketed Images, which appeared to be the HDR one. It is very slow, mind. It takes about 2 minutes on my PC to put those 3 photographs together. I wasn't so impressed that when it finished, it popped up a dialogue that didn't even preview the image that it had created. You had to click on a button to do so. And that dialogue was also wrongly sized, so you couldn't see the save options on the right-hand side. Again, it's bad interface design, or perhaps it looks fine on KDE and just doesn't work on a Ubuntu desktop.
Yeah, but it is pushing it a bit far to ask you to reinstall your operating system just to look at this bit of software.
Yeah, I think so a little bit. And ditto for the image stitching thing. It worked absolutely fine. Again, it's a wizard-based process, slightly different from the HDR one, but it works fine. You don't get to choose your image output format, which surprised me. It just spat out a JPEG after stitching together my 2 JPEG images in this case. I would have thought I'd have had an option there to pick a different format.
Yeah, I didn't see any options for different formats, actually, once I'd stitched stuff together. So, yeah, I didn't think about it at the time, but yeah, that seems to ring true with this as well.
Yeah, but as I mentioned earlier, I mean, those other 2 tasks I successfully completed, and they both, as far as I could see, relied on Hugin being installed as part of the plugin process.
Yes, this goes to show that my research was not particularly good on these 3 bits of software.
Yeah, but he did bring Hugin to the table previously on the show, so yeah, spot on in that case.
So we've been talking about the HDR and the stitching. Can't be done in Shotwell. That's just a no. It does view raw images. It does overexpose, underexpose, black and white, rotate and crop, as I said. And you can do. It has a whole load of pre-selected crop ratios for standard photo frames and squares and things. But there's no HDR and there's no merging of photos. But once you do make edits on those photos, they're not actually saved to disk. They're sort of saved within the program. And so you can look at it's a bit confusing because you look at your edits and you think that looks perfect. And you go to your photo that you want to send to your mum because you've edited it. And it's exactly as it was. And you actually need to go through the process of publishing it. And that's where you get to select, what quality, whether it be JPEG, TIFF, PNG, things like this. And it allows you to do the process of adding your Google details and publishing it onto Picasa, which, as far as I know, is kind of defunct. So that's a bit old, but Picasa web albums are still up and available. And so I did that, and you can view them online if needs be. So when making the edits, were they saved straight away? Did it warn you it was about to change them? What was the process there?
Well, in Photox, it kind of does it on the screen, and you've got all your edits there. And then if you try and move to see another photo, at that point it prompts you, do you want to discard your changes or do you want to save them? And so then you save it, and then it just adds a little bit to the file name, and then you've got your old version and your new saved version. Well, I think there is an option to overwrite it as well. But yeah, it's not automatic, which is good because generally I want to keep my original as well as the new one that I've edited.
Yeah, in Gwenview it seemed very variable. I mean, some things you had undo available, and some things you were warned you didn't have undo available. Fortunately, it doesn't do very much at all, so those cases are very rare. But another thing you asked us to look at, Jesse, was things like tagging.
Yeah, so the layout of your photos is generally sort of chronological, but you may wish to have every photo of your dog that you've ever taken, and so you can add a tag, therefore you can find them a lot more quickly. And that was a feature in Gwenview?
Yeah, there's a tagging system and a rating system, but any tag changes don't seem to be seen until after the app's restarted. And even then, clicking on the tag names I'd created on the home screen of Gwenview just resulted in a spinning loading icon, sort of indicating loading or processing, until I got bored and actually killed the app.
It just falls down at every hurdle, doesn't it, Gwenview, by the sounds of it? Whereas with Photox, it's possible, and it's reasonably easy, I suppose, albeit fairly clumsy. You have to go into edit metadata for the image that you want to tag, and you can't tag it directly. You have to edit your master tags, as it were, and create one, and then tag your individual photo with that tag that you have created elsewhere. So it seems like a very clumsy way to do it. But if you only had a limited number of categories that you wanted to tag them in, then I suppose it wouldn't be that much hassle to set them up before you start tagging them. And then once you've done that, it's very easy to search through them. I tagged some, cat or whatever, then searched. And then instead of seeing all of your photos, suddenly it was just the few that you tagged with it. So once you get it working, again, it's that same thing as with the editing. When it comes to photo management in Photox, it's a clumsy interface, but it actually does what it's supposed to do. So the functionality's there. It just needs some work on the interface, I think.
Shortwell sounds like, dare I say, the easiest of the 3 again, where you have this array of all your photos and you can right click and select to edit, or one of the other options is add tags. And so you can just put the tags in, and once you have, it just writes them very small below it, so you can remember that you've, holiday in France and your dog was in it and it was sunny or whatever it is. And then in the left-hand column that they've got, you can arrange your photos, as I said, either chronologically, by folders, and then by tags. So you can either do a search, as Joe was saying, or you can actually see all your tags listed and click on them, and then it reduces your photos to just the ones that you've tagged with that one. So I feel if we just wrap this up, the listener is likely to know what the conclusions are already. But Paddy?
Yeah, if I run out of needles to stick in my eyes, I might use Greenview.
High praise.
And if you had some small photo editing to do, Joe, would you use Photox?
I don't think so, because I've got GIMP already to do the things that I need to do. And I don't need to learn this other way of doing it. And I've never been one for organizing my photos. I'm more one for chucking them in one big folder and praying that my hard disk doesn't die and occasionally backing them up. So I just don't think that I could see myself using it, really. And I don't think I could recommend it either because of the clunky interface. I think that someone could take it as a piece of free software and improve the interface, because I think a lot of the hard work has actually been done already, the behind the scenes stuff, but it needs someone with some UI and UX knowledge and expertise to improve on it, I think. And that seems to be a perennial problem with free software, doesn't it? I mean, Audacity is the prime example. Very functional, few problems with Pulse, but let's sweep those under the carpet. But aesthetically, pretty awful.
Yeah, and having used all three, well, let's get rid of Gwenview for a start. Comparing Shotwell and Photox, I do come down on the side of the fence. It depends on how much you want to do with it. Shotwell looks much better, has a nicer sort of interface, and does do most of the very simple things that as we've discussed. I was very impressed by the range of things that Photox did. I entirely agree it needs a significant facelift, but I was really, really surprised at what it could do. And like you say, once you learn where they are, you could probably quite happily use it without really having to think too much and dig around. Now, I did also install F-Spot just to sort of round off the four potentials. It could do most of the very easy things like rotating and cropping, but actually sort of brightening and black and white, it struggled with, and it didn't do the HDR and the stitching and things. I found that it wasn't as capable as Shotwell. It did have a very nice chronological order sort of thing, like Carousel, the Dropbox photo viewer. I don't know if that's a bit specific, but it does mean you can sort of go through a timeline rather than having to go through your folders or something. And so overall, I would say if you want something simple, go Shotwell. If you want something with a bit more functionality and can overlook the interface, it's got to be Photox. And I thank you both for putting up with my homework and getting all the way through this, Paddy.
Well, let's turn it back round on you then. You set us this task because you wanted to find an application to manage your photos and possibly edit them. Are you going to use any of these four?
Yeah, it'll be Photox.
So you think you might install it and actually use it then?
Yeah, because I store my photos using Rapid Photo Downloader, and that automatically names them by date and camera, and then also puts them into folders by date. So the actual organization, I have a logical method on the hard disk itself, and I am not going to go through and tag hundreds and thousands of photos, so it's just a bit late to start that. And actually it made me think this is where Google Photos auto finder, where you type in candle or fire, it does it for you. It's dangerously powerful. And so the thing that I would use it for most is easy tweaks, and the fact that it seems to do HDR quite nicely. You can rotate and crop and tweak the various color levels and things. It has enough power without having to go all the way into Darkroom or GIMP or something. It's my sort of level, I think. So yeah, Photox is the winner for me.
Well, if you want to see the photos that Jesse gave us and the list of tasks that we had to do and how we got on with them, then we'll post a link to that in the show notes. But with that then, we're coming to the end of another Linux Luddites. You can email us at show@linuxluddites.com, find us on Twitter, Google+, or Facebook, or leave a comment on the website. Thanks for joining me, Paddy and Jesse, and thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you again next week for more Linux news, reviews, comment, and generally being grumpy.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, folks.
See you later.